But by and large, we're not expecting a huge shift in manufacturing activity to the US as a result of these tariffs because of the way they've been structured.
There are all sorts of countries who won't be in such a good mood today because they found out what Donald Trump has imposed on them with his latest round of tariffs, which include 35% on goods from Canada, 25% for India. New tariffs also be imposed on the UK, on the EU. The UK, they've kept their 10%, along with the Falkland Islands, which I think is the lowest of anyone. So what are we doing right? Is Starmer's magic actually working?
Yeah, it's good news for the sheep on the Falkland Islands. Yeah, it's interesting. This is undoubtedly a diplomatic win for Keir Starmer. If we had said at the outset of this trade war that Britain would stand almost alone in having a 10% tariff, I think lots of people would have been surprised. And it's a testament, I think, to the relationship Keir Starmer and Donald Trump have built. I mean, Donald Trump tells anyone who will listen in diplomatic circles that Keir Starmer is in his, as Brian Clough called, the top one of his international partners. So, yes, it's good news for Britain. For everybody else, it's a mixed bag. I mean, you have countries, for instance, like Thailand, who've been hit with a 19% reciprocal tariff, who are looking at it and thinking, well, it could have been worse. And Canada, of course, that long-running and very bitter row between Donald Trump and Mark Carney has resumed with some force overnight. You know, Mark Carney issuing a lengthy statement saying how disappointed he is, even if lots of the goods that would have been hit with tariffs are exempted by the North American Free Trade Agreement with the US, Canada and Mexico. Cars, lumber, other raw materials as well that Canada depends so much economically on are going to be really hit by this.
Well, let's now speak to David Henig, who is a former UK trade negotiator, who's now the director for the European Centre for International Political Economy. David, thank you very much for joining us. This is good news, relatively, for the UK, isn't it?
Yes. There's definitely no doubt about it. The UK has got one of the better deals. Surprisingly enough, it's actually quite a good deal for the EU as well, despite all the complaints there. I would say the EU and the UK, probably Australia as well, have got the best deals there are. I mean, everybody loses from higher tariffs to the US, but as a pretty good 10%, it will affect trade a little bit, but it shouldn't affect it too much, hopefully. Of course, with always the add-on for Trump, this may all change tomorrow, so we can't be sure this stays for anything like the long term.
Yeah, and I'm just wondering how much, I mean, the rates, we look at someone like, big Far Eastern countries, Vietnam, their rate announced on Liberation Day has been cut to 26%. Thailand, it was 36%, it's cut to 19%. I mean, are those sort of countries who've seen a cut, are they cock-a-hoop, or have they just been blindsided by it? It was such an enormously high rate when it was first announced back in April that it's just kind of, well, in relative terms, it's not as awful as it was going to be.
I think every country is practically in survival mode here as they're doing their maths along with businesses in their country. What can we survive? I mean, for a lot of these countries, the goods they're producing are relatively low cost. They may feel that that's a tariff rate that they can live with, even if it's not ideal. It's unlikely, for example, that the UK would start producing some of the goods that are produced in Thailand or Vietnam. So they're comparing against each other as well, and against the fact it would cost extra to produce their goods in the US, and thinking we might be able to get away with this. There's some others that are probably pondering quite why they ended up with so high. I mean, Switzerland 39% is a very high rate. So I think everyone's doing the maths this morning and trying to work out what they can live with. But by and large, most countries, the feeling, and this is from the stock market as well, the feeling is this could have been worse. It was worse first time round. Now the wheels of trade will keep turning with these figures.
Yeah, and can you explain the logic behind these tariffs? The idea presumably was to kickstart US manufacturing. Do we know whether that is, I mean, obviously these things take time, but do we think that's starting to work? Have any major US companies decided to onshore, horrible word, sorry, to onshore their manufacturing back in the US?
Well, somebody else in the trade community has counted 7 different reasons that President Trump has given for tariffs. One for certain is that they are starting to bring quite a lot of revenue into the US Treasury, so they'll be happy with that. In terms of investment or changing your production location, there's always lots of announcements ongoing about companies doing this and that. It's not entirely clear that any of them so far have anything to do with these tariffs. And there's a very good reason for that Trump is putting tariffs on whether it's for inputs to finished goods or finished goods themselves. So in many cases, it will still, in almost all cases, it will probably still be cheaper to build all these products outside of the US and take the final tariff rather than to build it in the US where you've got to pay the tariffs for all the inputs as well. So there will be a little bit of a shift. There's still conversations ongoing about the pharmaceutical sector, which seems to be one where Trump has a particular interest and where, they do want to see more drugs made in the US. But by and large, we're not expecting a huge shift in manufacturing activity to the US as a result of these tariffs because of the way they've been structured.
And then one of the results is surely going to be that US inflation is going to tick up. The price of goods that US consumers have to pay for anything imported has to become more expensive. I mean, so far US inflation is, it's moderated since Trump has come into the White House. Have we got any sense when this might be seen or start hitting US consumers' pockets?
I think it's likely to be a slow process because, for one thing, there are quite a lot of exemptions to these tariffs which are going to mean that prices aren't rising. Prices are about more than the cost of bringing in goods, which is often a small part of them when you consider things like the branding, the intellectual property, all the costs around retail. So prices probably will tick up slowly in the US, and that's what we're already seeing. But don't expect this to lead to any sort of huge spike in inflation. It seems likely that that will be averted again because there's enough exemptions. For example, the tariffs of 50% on Brazil. Brazil's a major supplier of coffee to the US and many other products, but some of those products have now been exempted from tariffs. So the president is doing enough, I think, to just about avoid major inflation in the US, but it will be higher as a result.
And David, finally, can you give me any sense? I mean, Trump, I think earlier this week was boasting how many billions of dollars he was bringing into the US Treasury. Do we actually have an accurate figure? Do we know how much this may raise for the government?
Well, he's bringing into. There are figures of billions in terms of the extra tariff revenues. In terms of the investment, nobody is taking any of the figures on investment that countries like Japan and the EU have promised in any way seriously. For example, what the EU apparently did is go around European companies and ask them how much they were already planning to invest in the US, and then put roughly that figure plus a bit as their promise to the US. So. Really, no evidence of extra investment, some evidence of extra money into the US Treasury, but that's being paid for by US importers. So it's in effect, he has delivered a tax cut in his budget and a tax rise through tariffs.